As always, I'm glad to be here, Danny.
Well, listen, let's. I want to get into what Bess is saying here. I'm sure a lot of people have seen this comment so far. Just kind of off the cuff, is there some room to have some kind of new sanctions or some new caliber of sanctions or multiple levels of sanctions that's going to change the course of action, or it's going to change the mentality and the decision making process of the regime in Tehran?
Well, a couple of points. You want to remember that when President Trump in his first term pulled out of the JCPOA, he said that he was going to put maximum pressure on the Iranians. And in this second term, he's often said that he has maximum pressure on the Iranians. So if he had maximum pressure on the Iranians, it's hard to understand what he can add to that that's going to make the situation worse. That's one point you want to keep in mind. Second point is that all of this just shows you that the balance of military coercion has shifted so decisively in favor of the Iranians that we have basically abandoned the idea of initiating military force once again to try and get our way with the Iranians. And what we're doing is we're trying to deal with them through, number one, a blockade. But of course, the blockade didn't work that well. So now what we're trying to do is cut Iran off from the rest of the world in terms of economic intercourse. So here we are, where maximum pressure today means not simply a blockade, but a blockade plus cutting Iran off from all of its trading partners. And this includes, of course, countries like China, Russia, the Turks, the UAE, the Pakistanis, and so forth and so on. And by the way, even the European Union. So all of that economic intercourse has to be cut off for this to work. So that is basically what the game plan is. My final point is this is not going to work. There is not a single case that I know of in recent history where an economic blockade of the sort that we're proposing actually caused a country to surrender. And the second point you want to keep in mind, which is not a minor point, is that when you put tremendous pressure on a country with an economic blockade and you start to bring it to its knees, usually what happens is that it lashes out. It understands its survival is at risk and it attacks. And I would note that this is exactly what happened in 1941, and it's what led the Japanese to attack us at Pearl Harbor. Most people don't realize this. They think the Japanese just attacked us out of the blue. The Japanese decided that they could easily lick the United States and become a world power, and so forth and so on. That's simply not true. We put a wicked oil blockade on the Japanese. I think it was on July 25th, if my memory's correct, 1941. It was late July 1941, where we put an oil blockade on Japan and we froze its assets. And we had earlier put a blockade on its iron and steel imports in 1940. So the Japanese were in desperate straits. They thought that we were threatening their survival with an economic blockade. And what they did was they attacked us at Pearl Harbor. And this just goes to show you that even when an economic blockade really begins to bite, the other side has a retaliatory capability. And just to go to Iran, I don't think you're going to bring the Iranians to their knees. I don't think you're going to threaten their survival. And we can go through why that's the case. But if you do threaten their survival, they're not going to sit there and just disappear or surrender or what have you. They're going to lash back. And as we know very well from countless conversations on this show, they have the capability to retaliate.
And according to all accounts, those capabilities have been continuing to expand after the last of that 13-day back and forth strikes that we had been doing. They're continuing to build. So by all accounts, that they're stronger now, have more capability than they did at the end of that 13-day period. I want to take a look. There's something else that Besson said. I'm going to get to in just a second that I found really curious and peculiar. First of all, let's look. This is not just that they have announced this and it's now gone into effect. There's some things have gone into effect. Some things have not yet gone into effect, which is interesting. The things that have gone into effect is broadening secondary sanctions, targeting 5 sectors: digital assets, technology, gold, aviation, and shipping. And then you see some of the other entity and individual designations. I won't get into a lot of that, but I just want to stick off, first of all, on the top section there of these 5 targeted areas. What kind of, I mean, even if it's going to work, and you just made a good, strong case that if it did work, we'd be in more trouble because now then they're going to lash out and do something. But let's just look at all first about the potential efficacy. If you target their digital assets, technology, gold, aviation, and shipping from where it has been since the 28th of February, is that by itself, or better question, it's going to work? Might that work? Are we talking like a few weeks, a few months, a year, 2 years? What do you think?
No, there's almost no question that for this to work, it's going to take many, if not years, to work. And again, for it to work, you have to get the Chinese, the Pakistanis, the Turks, the UAE, and all these other countries to get on board and play ball with you. And the Chinese have already made it clear that they're not going to play ball. I believe the Russians have made it clear they're not going to play ball. I find it hard to believe that the Turks and the Pakistanis will go along with this. You want to remember, Danny, that almost every country in the world has a vested interest, or let me put it differently, almost every country in the world is rooting for the Iranians, and they're rooting against us. And furthermore, there are a good number of important players in this situation. And here I'm talking mainly about the Chinese and the Russians, but also the Pakistanis and the Turks, who have a vested interest in seeing us not win in Iran. If you're China or you're Russia, 2 great powers that are rivals of the United States, you do not want to see the United States defeat Iran. You want to see the Iranians win. So the Chinese have very powerful incentives. The Russians have very powerful incentives to help the Iranians. And just to go to the Turks for a second, the Turks fully understand that the Israelis have their crosshairs on them. The Israelis have made it manifestly clear that they view Turkey as a prime target after the United States and Israel finish off Iran. Well, if that's the case, the Turks for sure are going to want to see Iran defeat the United States and Israel. Then there's the United Arab Emirates, one of Iran's most important trading partners, for sure. The data shows this very clearly. The Iranians have made it clear that if the UAE engages in this blockade in a serious way, that Iran will wreck the UAE. And as we know, Iran has the military capability with all those ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones to wreck the UAE. So you have to ask yourself, do you think it's likely that the UAE is going to accommodate the Americans and participate full scale in this blockade? I don't think so. So it's just hard for me to see how this works. And I think your question then gets down to the unrealistic scenario where everybody plays ball. And then the question is, how long do the Iranians last? And there, as I said at the beginning of my comments, that I think, it would take months, if not years, to get the Iranians to surrender.
And that's even to get to the point to where they would have to contemplate it. And then the most likely scenarios, they would do something else on top of that. Instead of that, rather. I want to get back to the comment there about, though, that there are some parts of this that haven't gone into effect yet. So some have, some have not. At the press conference after Secretary Bessent made his comments or his initial opening statement, he was asked a question about why, if he says this is like D-Day, why are you announcing that you're going to do this stuff, but not yet? In his answer, I want you to notice one thing in particular. He first of all is going to say, why would I want to blow up the global economy, which would seem to preclude the rest of his statement. But then he adds a very curious threat at the end.
Describe this as an economic D-Day, but D-Day wasn't a threat of an invasion, and the U.S. didn't give a timeline to Germany. So why not impose the sanctions today?
We are giving everyone the opportunity to remedy bad behavior. Why would I want to blow up the global financial system? We believe that it is important to level set and give people a cure period, but they should know that that will move very quickly and that we are serious. Secondary sanctions are a very powerful tool, and we here at Treasury, this is Gene Lang, the acting undersecretary for terrorism finance. And in the terrorism finance department and in OFAC, the reason we are able to use secondary sanctions is because we do not take their use lightly. So we believe that a warning shot and a level set of expectations is appropriate. And if people do not want to meet our expectations, then we expect, and they should expect, that they will leave the dollar system.
Okay. First of all, if you're saying, why would I want to blow up the global economy? What does it matter whether you do it now or later? If that's going to be the outcome, why would you want to do that? But secondly, and Bob, this is where I want most of your comments. Why am I threatening to get people out of the dollar system, which is not good for our side?
I have no answer to that, Danny. I just don't understand these people are thinking. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, let's just go to the China case. We tried the secondary sanctions strategy with them in 2025, and it backfired. They have significant economic leverage against us. The idea that we can threaten them economically and they'll just take it and they'll eventually realize they have to cooperate with us is not a serious argument. And they've already made it clear that they're not going to cooperate with us. So I don't understand what Bessent is talking about. And then when he says that he's not imposing all of these sanctions right away because he doesn't want to blow up the international economy, you just sort of scratch your head and say, wow, does that mean that once they are imposed, the international economy is going to be blown up? And this gets to your point. What's the difference between doing it today or tomorrow? And again, you just scratch your head when these people talk and you sort of say, haven't you thought this thing through? Don't you have a coherent strategy in place? And the answer, of course, is no, because as we've come to understand, just watching the Trump administration in action since last January, this January 2025, this is the gang that can't shoot straight. And, if you read the newspapers or you read the different websites where you have various kinds of experts talking about what the likelihood of success of this new economic strangulation campaign are or is, almost everybody thinks it's going to fail. It's not like there are, a handful of really smart people who understand how markets work and the international economy works more generally, who who are saying that this stands a really good chance of working. Everybody seems to think it's going to fail, which again gets back to the question, what is the administration thinking? And the fact is, Danny, I mean, what's going on here is that they're desperate. They've tried every trick in the book. They started with a major air campaign. They went to blockade. Then they signed the memorandum of understanding. Then they went to tit for tat. Then they went back to blockade. And none of that worked. The Iranians were still standing. And again, the balance of military coercion, we cannot underestimate this. The balance of military coercion now favors the Iranians, not the Americans. When this war started, the Americans were in the driver's seat in terms of employing military force. We thought we had a very powerful hammer that we could use against them and get our way. But as time has gone by, it's become clear that we do not have a military card left to play. Just think about that. We do not have a military card left to play. It's the Iranians who have the military card. If this war escalates, or let's put it differently, if we go back to a shooting war, because we don't have a shooting war now between the Iranians and the Americans, I think in all likelihood, it will be the Iranians who initiate that war. If you listen to the Iranians talk, they talk in very offensively oriented terms. They're basically saying the best defense is a good offense. This is the Iranians. This is not the way they were talking when the war first started. It's not how they were talking in the early months of the war. And again, what you see has happened here is that the balance of military coercion has shifted, I think, almost decisively in their favor. It's a truly remarkable situation. And so here we are trying to figure out a way to bring them to their knees with maximum economic pressure. But if you go back to 2015, that's when the JCPOA was signed, and then ramp forward to 2018 when Trump pulled out of it. Trump said then, I'm going to put maximum pressure on the Iranians. And he has gone to enormous lengths, as did Joe Biden, and has Trump number 2 to put maximum pressure on the Iranians. But it hasn't worked. And there's no reason when you look at the historical record and you think about how these things work to expect this strategy to get the Iranians to quit. One final point, Danny, before I go over to you. You want to remember that from Iran's point of view, this is an existential threat. The United States and Israel are genocidal states. President Trump has used all sorts of genocidal language in talking about the Iranians and what he plans to do to them. And furthermore, the United States has, along with Israel, of course, engaged in a genocide in Gaza. If you're the Iranians, the idea that you're going to reach some sort of compromise settlement with the United States, or that you're going to concede defeat to the United States, you're going to surrender, is almost out of the question. You have to fight to the death. You're up against an existential threat here. You're up against the United States of America and Israel. And I think, given the fact that the Iranians think they're facing an existential threat, they are extremely unlikely to throw up their hands and surrender just because we've upped the economic ante on them.
Yeah, it doesn't. It would be almost irrational for them to do so, and illogical, and they don't suicidal. Better put, and they don't appear to be suicidal. They certainly haven't in their previous 47 years. I'd like your view, though, on the last part there. And instead of just looking at the Iran part of this, I'm having a hard time understanding what the mentality is behind Bessent to actually say out loud that you're threatening to get people out of the dollar system when we're trying to keep more people in them? How do you see that?
I think it's crazy. It makes no sense at all. My reaction when I first heard that is that he must have misspoke. I mean, you and I both know from being on shows like this and talking to audiences that you sometimes inadvertently say something that you later say, oh, I can't believe I said that. I thought, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I thought when he said that he just misspoke, because it makes no sense at all. It would be disastrous for the United States if countries started abandoning the dollar system. It's just not in our interest at all. I mean, I think everybody knows that. So I can't give you a rational explanation for why he said that.
And, you know, and the way he said it at the end of that soundbite, I mean, it didn't sound like a misspoke. It sounded like he meant what he said, that he thought somehow that would coerce people to do what they wanted, to stay inside the dollar system. But we'll wait and see how that one's going to play out. You mentioned a minute ago that most of the experts that are out there on the mainstream media, whatever, are all saying this is not going to work, except for one mainstream outlet, and that is Fox News, where almost everyone is paraded upon saying that this is going to be a great deal and it's definitely going to work. One of whom is Mike Pompeo.
I thought it was important, too, that he laid down the moral case for why it is the United States is engaging in these. From D-Day to victory was quite a time. It didn't happen overnight, and so we'll have to be patient as they impose these sanctions after the timelines where they're going to give grace so folks can make transitions. It will still take time for them to feel the pressure. He mentioned both aviation and energy. The aviation industry provides a lot of money to the IRGC and its people. If all air travel in and out of Iran is closed down, that's a significant step. A couple of reporters asked questions about Chinese banks. It's always been something that we have been very careful about, secondary sanctions on Chinese banks. To actually execute a real D-Day, secondary sanctions against Chinese banks will have to be imposed.
Now, you know a lot about Chinese. There's a couple of points I'm going to make off his comments there, but let's start with that one. What success rate do you think that he's going to have at getting Chinese banks to actually buckle to our pressure?
He may get some banks to buckle to our pressure. I can't say for sure, but the Chinese in general have made it clear that they're not going to play ball. I don't know the specifics of what exactly we're going to do and what exactly the Chinese will do in response. Just hard to say at this point, and I haven't studied the issue that carefully. But the Chinese have made it clear that they're not going to let this work. And as I said to you before, they have powerful economic cards to play, and they have a powerful strategic interest in making sure that we lose in the war against Iran. But I don't know exactly what banks can do X or Y and what we will do with those banks and how the Chinese will respond. It's just not an area I know that much about.
And they did put this out. This is out in Global Times earlier today. They said in direct reaction to this, they said, economic D-Day, the U.S. has picked the wrong script for sanctioning Iran. And in the process of this article here, they specifically mentioned that last May that they had passed legislation that prohibited some of their banks from actually doing what we wanted. And then what they did write in this article was Washington is opening multiple fronts at once, waging an economic war against Iran while simultaneously fighting sanctions battle with China, India, Turkey, and even its European allies. Besant has even threatened that countries that failed to cooperate could be excluded from the dollar system. They saw that same comment. It is a blatant weaponization of the dollar, turning the global financial system into a tool of unilateral punishment. China has a comprehensive range of legal and policy tools at its disposal and will take all necessary measures to firmly safeguard its legitimate rights and interests. That does not lack that they are waffling between submitting to what Besant wants to do or maybe trying something different. Sounds to me, as you suggested, that they're saying, yeah, we ain't doing that.
I think they've made that manifestly clear. Again, I don't know the details. This is something that, is above my pay grade, but there's just no question that the Chinese are not going to let this happen. And I think the Chinese are not the only country. I don't think the Turks are going to play ball. The Russians are going to play ball. And I actually think the UAE won't play ball either. But, we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. And by the way, I didn't know anything was above your pay grade, just kind of as an aside.
If only.
Pompeo there said, listen, you have to be patient. This is going to take some time. Okay, on that point there, do we have the time? And let me show you this from President Trump was talking to Glenn Beck earlier today. He made a certain account about how he sees the issue of time in a certain sense.
Iran, which I think will be ending fairly soon. You could really say the strait is open. We take a lot of ships through the strait now. We're taking them in. The mines are gone. We got rid of the mines. But the strait, it's functioning. It's a functioning strait. Yes, every once in a while there'll be a drone or a rocket or something shot, but it is a very functioning strait. A lot of oil is pouring out. 10 million barrels yesterday.
Yeah, but is it really open? Because you look at non-White House statements. This is from the U.S. Joint Maritime Information Center. It says that Hormuz traffic remains sharply reduced. It counted 36. First of all, this is from the Bobbleman. No, sorry. This is I'm sorry. This is the Strait of Hormuz first. It counted 36 U.S. facilitated transits on August 23 and 24 in a combined 48-hour period, compared with 2025 baseline of roughly 138 vessels per day. But then you also have the Bab el-Mandab, which the organization counted 76 transits across those same 2 days, averaging 38 per day, compared with the 23 baseline of 61. So that one's at about half. And then you see the significantly reduced from the Strait of Hormuz. So the oil is not flowing out. And when you look at some of the details about how much it's getting out, it was a lot less than that, like 1.5 to 3 million barrels, not 10 barrels per day. Then you look at the consequence of that on the U.S., and our strategic petroleum reserves continues to dwindle. It is now to the lowest point since 1982. And you can see it doesn't have to go too much further, and it's going to get down to the lowest it's ever been in history. And we don't know how far it can go before we start having damage to our to the facilities that are hosing this and the caverns and all that kind of stuff. We seem to be playing this, and it looks to me like we don't actually have time to let this thing play out over time. And yet that's what we're trying to do. What's going to happen here?
Well, just let's talk about what's coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. And you can talk about it in terms of the amount of oil, million barrels a day, or in terms of the number of ships that are going through. Those are two different indicators. Of course, they correlate with each other. But let's just talk about ships. Before February 28th, on average, there were probably about 130 ships a day going through the strait. And according to most accounts that I've read, and these are from experts, not from the administration, probably somewhere in the range of 9 to 12 ships are getting out every day. So you've gone from 140 down to 9 to 12 ships a day. The Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, said last week that he believed 15 ships were going through, and some other people said they thought that maybe 20 ships a day were going through as a result of U.S. naval efforts to escort these ships. But most experts say that might have happened on one day, but on average, 9 to 12 ships are getting through. If you think about it, if there were 130 ships on February 27th and there are only 9 to 12 ships going through today, according to the experts outside of the administration, this tells you we are in a lot of trouble. And by the way, I was looking at the number of ships that were going through when the MOU was signed and the strait was actually opened up. And if my memory's correct, that number was around 40 ships a day. So we still were not close to the 130 ships a day. This all tells you that we have a real problem. Now, that problem has been mitigated by a number of factors. And as far as the Gulf is concerned, the key factor is that there's a pipeline in Saudi Arabia that runs to the Red Sea. And then there is a pipeline in the United Arab Emirates that runs to a port on the Sea of Oman called Fujairah. And quite a bit of oil has been getting out of the Gulf by not going through the Strait of Hormuz, but going through this Saudi pipeline and the UA pipeline. But now that the Houthis have stopped in good part Saudi shipping out of the Red Sea, all of that Saudi oil that was being diverted through the pipeline into the Red Sea and through the Bab al-Mandab Strait has been substantially reduced. So a lot less oil is coming out of the Persian Gulf now than was coming out of the Persian Gulf on February 27th. Now, there are other factors that have compensated for this. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which you were referencing, is one, but that's not a bottomless pit. And all the indications are that we're getting reasonably close to the bottom of that pit. And then there's Chinese demand. I mean, one of the reasons that we haven't had massive inflation with regard to oil prices is because the Chinese have significantly reduced their demand and compensated for the fact that a lot of those ships are not getting through the Strait of Hormuz. And the question is, what's going to happen with Chinese demand moving forward? There's some indications, not a lot, but some indications that Chinese demand for imported oil is going up. And if that's true, that will cause the price of oil to go up. But there are a lot of different factors at play. And when you look at this over the long term, it's not a pretty picture for the United States. And this, of course, is why President Trump is trying to end this war as quickly as possible. President Trump is desperate. And the reason that he is desperate is that this situation has huge consequences for the future of the international economy. And President Trump, you remember, when he signed the Memorandum of Understanding, remember what President Trump said? He was wary of an economic catastrophe. He said that. And he said he didn't want to be Herbert Hoover. Well, the situation has not gotten any better since when he signed the Memorandum of Understanding back on June 17th. And he's still in a situation where he has to be extremely careful because there are all these forces at play that are pushing the economy, the international economy, into a danger zone. And then on top of all that, he has the midterm elections coming up. And so I think that he's going to do everything he can to end this war. And that's why we've gone to this strangulation policy. But again, the question is, you have to ask yourself whether it's going to work or not. And you and I are betting it's not going to work. And let's assume that we're correct. Then the $64,000 question is, what does President Trump do next? Does he surrender? Does he get down on his knees and throw up his hands? Hard to imagine, but if he doesn't do that, where do we go from there?